And now we have our special guest, Becky Cameron, who's just joined us. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And welcome to a brighter day.
Right,
Thank
bright
you.
and hope for tomorrow. This show's all about people making a difference in the community and often making a positive impact on our society and our community in spite of losses and difficulties. We want to talk to you a little bit, Becky, about the grief process, but first of all, know a little bit more about you.
I worked as the hospital chaplain down in Tracy for 16 years and worked with their hospice program as well. I've lived here in Stockton off and on for 30 years, about 10 years so far this time. And I enjoy working with people.
So, as a hospice worker, what was often the most difficult thing about being around that kind of environment, Becky?
Probably the greatest challenge is just watching people struggle in a hospice setting. You're dealing with a lot of the anticipatory grief as people begin to grieve the loss of their loved one while their loved one is still with them. And that's a very difficult phase of the grief process, and watching them go through that, and then trying to help them find the support they need after their loved one has died, and going through that whole process can be challenging sometimes.
And another question relating to this with Mark Deiro, does the pain ever really go away? How do they overcome that? What do you tell people?
The best description I've ever heard of it from a speaker at a grief conference, that he said, you never get over a loss, but you learn to relate to your loved one in a new way. That they are no longer with you physically, and you have to learn to communicate with them, to remember them, in spite of that absence. We interact with people with our five senses, and we don't realize how often we depend on being able to see someone and hear them and touch them. And when that part of their presence is gone, we have to learn to relate to them in a new way and accept that loss as part of the experience of our life, part of the fabric of our life, that will always be with us. The person will be with us, and the experience of their loss will be with us, but it will change.
That is so wonderfully put, Becky. I myself worked about 15 years in a palliative care unit, I was telling you, and people had around 3 months to live, and I had to deal with the families and the patients. And that is just so wonderfully put. And I noticed that when we had groups, relative groups who were anticipating loss, or actually they had the loss, they related very well to one another, and they understood each other's pain and what they were going through. And we were just facilitators, but they really bonded together because they knew what the suffering was like. We often found that for spouses, and it would take around 2 years until the initial pain went away. But they say for children, it lasts forever, and using their name is like music to the parents' ears. Sometimes people don't want to talk to the parents about a child's loss or a young person's loss, but they like to hear the name. And
That's this tree ceremony lighting is all about too. Our hospice decided to do this. How far back does that go? Do you know, Becky?
I don't know how far back this particular one goes, but I know most hospice programs do some kind of event on at least an annual basis to remember people. What you just said, Marilyn, reminded me of a woman I met one time who had lost her young adult daughter, and she said she went back to work, and one of her coworkers came up to her and said, introduce me to your daughter. And she said at first she was kind of taken aback by that, but then she realized what a beautiful opportunity that was for her and how much it strengthened her to be able to introduce her daughter to this woman and to help the woman understand what a wonderful person her daughter was.
That is such an inspirational comment. I think you've probably gone through the gamut and seen many, many inspirational things, and that is certainly very poignant.
Anything memorable you'd like to share with us, Becky, on that topic? It's not meant to be morbid, but anything besides Mark, who's a great inspiration to us, people overcoming the loss in very positive ways, the way Mark Deiro has?
I think what Mark has done is the best example I've seen of somebody taking a tragedy and finding good out of it. It doesn't make it any less tragic, but it enables, in this case, Dominic to live on and impact this world in a very substantial way. You know, Mark will never know how many lives are saved or how many injuries prevented by this organization. And I think anytime we lose someone, if we can find something like this, some way of carrying on their influence so that they continue to live on in a very real way, very concrete way, it accomplishes so much, not only for their memory, but for our sense of loss.
So you have a grief support group you just started here in Stockton. It's on Wednesdays at the Methodist Church in the Fireside Room. You want to give the hours and time?
Yeah, from 1:30 to 3 on Wednesdays over here at Central United Methodist Church. This support group is an open-ended thing. A lot of grief groups are specific recovery type groups. They are intended to go 6 or 8 weeks, and you go in kind of with an objective of what you're going to do with your grief in that time. This is an open grief support group. Marilyn mentioned how other grievers can help new people who are going through the experience. I led a grief group for years down in Tracy, and it always fascinated me to watch the people in the group when a new person walked in the door. Even if the existing group had been there for months, and maybe that day we were mainly just making small talk, but a new person who was hurting walked in that door, and everybody, without so much as a skip of a heartbeat, they focused on that new person, helped them to be able to share, identified with their loss, and just strengthened each other.
I want to welcome back Mark Deiro, who just joined us again as we end this program. Mark, any questions you want to ask Becky Cameron, the hospice worker chaplain?
I listened to what Becky said, and my wife and I did go through a couples grieving counseling through hospice, and we found that it was so informative, and things that we could take from it to work on how we grieved every day. There was one statement that I took away from that counseling session that'll always stay in my mind, and that's you don't get over it, you have to go through it. And every day I am faced with different emotions, crying, laughing, whatever they are, and it's just a matter of getting a hold of them. And when I get down, I pray for strength, and thank God that I have that relationship. And I just thought that it was one of the best things my wife and I could have done, and would strongly encourage anybody who's gone through a crisis or a tragedy like this to seek professional help. I carry with me my son, whose name was Dominic, a St. Dominic card, and there's a paragraph on here that just is typifies what Dominic was while he was here, but in my mind, he's still here with me. It says here, on earth you open your heart to the miseries of your fellow men, and your hands were strong to help them. Now in heaven, your charity has not grown less, nor has your power waned. So I read that, and it gives me strength, and I know that Dominic is with us in spirit all the time.
We thank you for joining us. Once again, I thank Mark Deiro and Becky Cameron for joining us on this special TV version of A Brighter Day in Hope for Tomorrow. And thank you, audience, for participating, and also viewers. Thank you, and have a great week.